Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. This is episode number 42. My name is Mike, and that is a newly employed Gavin. Gavin, how are you doing?
Good. And if I sound a little bit different, that is because I am sitting actually in a hotel room, not actually in my apartment, because as Mike sort of alluded to, I have a job and I'm currently working that job. Fortunately, I had today off, which was very much needed. Um, but yeah, so this episode is going to be all about my job, what I'm doing out here, and a complete side of paleontology that less than 2 years ago I didn't even know existed. And now I'm working in it. So that's going to be sort of the first half of this episode. And then, as I mentioned to Mike, and I hope that I'm using the word correctly, but we're going to be doing some jurisprudence, which is, as I understand it, is like learning about laws and how they're applied, more or less.
I've always took that word as like being more about court cases, but either way,
Okay.
we're doing some legal study. I will, as
I,
you're
I
talking, I'll
will,
look up the right words.
okay, I will like sort of mention, I don't think have any like specific court cases lined up, but I'll talk about a couple of court cases as a reason for things being kind of dumb, uh,
You
particularly in my field.
you mentioned
But
sounding different. Do we have an official count of how many different locations you've recorded in?
um, I can think of four because my apartment in South Dakota, my parents' house in New York, my apartment in California, and now
You
here.
came to my girlfriend's house one time.
Oh, I did. So that's five.
That's be five. So we're up to five now.
Yeah, I travel a lot, I guess.
Five locations in 42 episodes. So we've got a pretty decent ratio down.
Yeah,
All right. So we have a calendar for today before we get started.
we sure do. So, do you have a year for me?
Um. So so before we started recording, Gavin said the most cryptic thing he could have possibly said, which is, "I want to get your reaction to the year," which doesn't help me even a little bit.
I
But
will tell you ahead of time. It is not 1969 for the meme. It's not as much as I would enjoy
yes,
that.
the year
It is not.
420. No. So I'm gonna. All right, little out of the box here. I'm gonna say it was the year 2020.
No, so I think that this no, because this calendar was well, I guess it technically could be. It's not impossible, I guess, but
Okay,
no.
so it's
So it's
not. It was not
actually
20.
it's very old.
Very, okay.
1990.
In 1990. So
This is
we
the
are
oldest one we've had so far.
by like 20 years almost. Like
Yeah, and
that's.
I don't mean that 1990 is that old. It's 31 years ago. That's not that long ago.
I mean, neither of us were alive.
True, but I don't want to offend any older listeners. Uh,
As compared to the many younger listeners that we have.
touche. So this is from this coming Friday, so October 1st, 1990. The Human Genome Project begins.
The human genome. Ooh.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
I was kind of tempted until I saw this one to just kind of dump the calendar for this week because none of them were even remotely like paleontology related, but being about genetics and like a bit, we've learned so much about human evolution from this as well. So beginning in
Right.
1990.
This was, from what I know, this was like a really big deal and like was a
Yeah.
wild success in terms
Hmm.
of the timeline and cost and benefit to humanity. Like that was always my understanding.
Oh yeah, 100%.
All right, let's hear about it.
Let's see what the calendar says. So beginning in 1990 and lasting until April 2003. The Human Genome Project was a massive international undertaking combining the efforts of multiple organizations, scientific teams, and financial backers to fully sequence the human genome and identify the genes it contains. After 13 years, the project was completed 2 years ahead of schedule, and the world saw the first fully accurate map of human DNA, the building blocks of every person on Earth. A milestone of 21st century science, this project had a huge impact on medicine, epigenetics, and several laws. So
Ooh.
epigenetics, I it's a little topical for this episode, I guess, the laws part, but epigenetics is a really fascinating part of genetics that like. So I've taken two genetics classes, and both of them are like, yeah, epigenetics could be like two courses by itself, and you wouldn't really even scratch the surface. So
Jeez,
it's
what is epigenetics? I know I've heard that term before, and I have since forgotten anything about it.
it is essentially the changes. So basically, from the time that like you are fertilized, by the time your parents' sperm and egg combine to create you, your
Excuse me,
DNA is
what?
yes, that is how babies are made. Funnily enough,
All of your
um,
parents had sex.
yes, they did. From the time that that happens, barring mutations and things that happen after that, your DNA is more or less, the actual, you know, bases, the A's, C's, T's, and G's that make up your DNA are pretty much set. Um, but what epigenetics does is things that happen throughout your life. It could be based on your diet. It could be based on, the quality of the air around you, or a million other things that we don't even truly understand. It can turn off or tweak certain aspects of your genes. So that's why somebody. It's more or less the reason, partially, why if you had two identical twins, their DNA is exactly the same, raised by different parents, one could be like 6 inches taller than the other one, more or less. That's a bit of an extreme oversimplification, but that's sort of how it works. Um, and in some cases, epigenetics and like the tweaks that go along with them can be passed on to your kids. That is a part that I really don't understand. Um, and that's all we're going to talk about that. But
I
it
was gonna say,
is.
look forward to that episode in about 6 years.
I was going to say that is something that I will probably never feel comfortable talking about. So we'd have to bring on somebody who actually knows stuff. Uh,
So if you're listening and you actually know stuff, take a
yeah,
look in the description for the forms down there.
absolutely. So on to work. So this first part's just going to be a sort of casual conversation with me and Mike and me talking about what I've been doing. Because I've been out here for about a week. We're recording
And
this like
and where's
oh god.
here? So for anybody that doesn't remember, like where is here? What are you doing?
So
For anybody that is listening to this episode for their first episode, what are you doing, Gavin? What's your job?
so I will preface this with there are certain things that I'm not allowed to like tell you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which makes the job
Like
seem
what?
way like the exact location, exactly like I'll tell you the name of like the company I work for, but not the company that like we are doing work for because
Oh, okay.
we are contracted out by another company.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
yeah, so I just want to preface this whole conversation with that. Even if I'm like even a little unsure if I'm allowed to say that or not, I'm just gonna keep it safe and not tell you. um, but yeah, so I am a paleontology monitor, which what does that sound like to you, Mike?
a, a a what monitor? A geology monitor
Paleontology
or
monitor.
paleontology
Yeah.
monitor? I mean, I'll tell you what it sounds like, and it's not very flattering. It sounds like somebody that's watching a lot of other people do paleontology.
I mean, in a way, sort of, but that's sort of coincidental. So I am both of those things are correct in that I am watching other people while I am doing paleontology. So basically,
Okay.
um, my company. So I work for a company. I think the main office is in Fresno, California, which is sort of in the middle Central Valley of California. But we've got offices all around like the southern and central part of California. Uh, but I work for a company called Applied Earthworks, and so essentially in especially California, but places where there's a lot of federal land in general, whenever you do construction on federal lands, you need to have permits from the federal government, obviously, and also depending on where you are and like what kind of rock you'll be doing your construction on, you need people there basically as sort of representatives from the government. I do not work for the government, uh, but I my job is to basically watch the construction and make sure that if we see a fossil, we stop the construction, figure out what it is, if it's worth collecting, because that is public land, you know. Um, and so that's what I've been doing for the past week. So as for where I've been, I'm not. I'm not even really going to mention the name of the town that we're staying in, but we are in the Mojave Desert.
Okay.
Um, it's very, very hot. Uh,
I can
but,
imagine.
but yeah, so that's what I've been doing for the past about a week. And, I got to tell you, if you would have told, like, so when did I decide I was going to, like, actually do paleontology for a career? Probably sometime in, like, my senior year of high school or so.
Right.
If you would have told little, 16, 17-year-old Gavin that, oh, you're doing paleontology just surrounded by construction equipment and wearing a hard hat and wearing a safety vest all day, uh, I would have been like, what? Why? Why am I there? Why am I not in the museum or the lab? Um, but yeah, this is a side of paleontology that many people from like the East Coast, especially, don't even know about because why would you?
Is it well, why is that? Is it because like all of that kind of hard work has already been done? Is it just the East Coast is not a great spot to do that kind of, construction work outside?
So there's
What
there,
yeah.
there's a lot of reasons for it. The main one is that there's just like exponentially more federal land in the West than there is in the East.
Hmm.
So all of these things are federally regulated things. So that's going to be like the second half of this episode is me sort of going over the laws and the weird history of some of the laws that govern what I do. Uh, but they're only apply to federal land. You know, so
Right.
there is federal land on the East Coast. It's just way, way, way less than there is. Like, there's probably more federal land in like New Mexico by itself than there is on like the entire Eastern Seaboard.
I have read a lot about federal land, and I think that might be just about right.
So, yeah, there's just not as applicable. Also, for reasons that we'll sort of talk about in the jurisprudence section. Um, Generally, at least particularly in the Northeast, uh, it's not really even applicable, even if there were federal land up there, just because the rocks are not correct.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can sort of go into it a little bit now, but basically, vertebrate fossils are pretty much the only thing that the federal laws are concerned with, which, even as a vertebrate paleontologist, and I often joke how much I dislike invertebrates, things without bones, things like your insects, your clams, your squids, things like that. As much
Hmm.
as I joke about how I don't enjoy working on them and that they're confusing to me,
Yeah,
uh,
you've mentioned that I think more than once.
they are the vast majority of animals on the planet, and for uh, a very considerable amount of time, they were the vast, vast majority of fossils. And even still, most places that you go, if you actually look and don't just focus on the big stuff, the vast majority of things that you'll find are probably invertebrates or plants, because plants are also not really covered,
Hmm.
uh, which we'll talk about probably quite a bit at length in the actual, talking about the laws and things.
Okay.
But but yeah, so that's the main reason, is that in the Northeast, all of the rocks are a little too old to have like significant vertebrate fossils over there. Um, if we, so, if you sort of look back to, I need to get better about learning what episode number is what, but the geology of New York, it's all fairly old rocks. Even like a lot of the younger rocks are, I don't know, like Devonian probably around, so like not less, significantly less than like 400 or so, 380 or so million years old. And there were definitely vertebrates around, but they were barely crawling onto land at that point. So up until then, it was mostly fish, which tend to not preserve super well. Things that do preserve really well are things like clams, where it's like there's no bits to fall apart. There's just sort of two bits that will probably fall apart, but after that, you have the whole half of a clamshell, or other kind of shelly animals. So lots and lots of invertebrates in the Northeast, not that many vertebrates.
Understood.
And so my job, more or less, is to walk. that is that is
How many
so.
steps you getting in?
Oh God. So the first day that I kept track was, I think, my third day, and I didn't do it well because I used Pokemon Go. I hatched a ton of eggs and got so many candies for my buddy. Um, but I walked. Generally, I walk anywhere from 6 to 8 miles probably a day,
Six to
and
eight miles every day. Wow.
pretty much. And so,
While on the clock too. Like that's
oh heck yeah, dude. Um, and also in the desert, which is the real kicker,
that right.
because so where I actually live in California is in an area that is like weirdly protected from a lot of like California's extreme weather. Um, so like the city that I actually live in, called Santa Maria, I've been there for about a month, and the hottest that it's been has been like maybe 85.
Mm-hmm.
And considering California is known to be really hot and really dry, I haven't experienced that a ton. Just because of where I live happens to be an area that is pretty protected from that. Uh,
Right.
but out here, the first day out here in the desert, the first day was the worst because it was hovering around anywhere from 105 to 110 degrees. Not a cloud in sight, so no shade whatsoever. And it was my first day on the job.
That's a. I mean, at least they're breaking you, ripping the band-aid off right away at that point.
That's pretty much what they told me, because this project is fairly large. Um, Obviously, without going into too many details, they I think I should be fine saying it's just because they're putting them up everywhere in California, but we're long term, the goal of this project is to put up a solar farm.
Okay.
Um, and so, which
Yeah,
is really
I
really
was gonna
cool
say I
to
can't
me.
imagine that's gonna identify a particular location in California.
Yeah, right. Um, but which is super cool to me because I'm doing some things that I really care a lot about, which is like finding and collecting and preserving fossils, and also helping sort of install and helping with the process of expanding our renewable energy infrastructure. Super cool. Um, so this is a project that I'm really, really happy to be a part of.
Right.
Uh, but man, that first day. So from what I've understood, most projects that I'm on will be considerably smaller than this. The first day, um, I want to say there were about 10 to 15 of us, just from our company there. And there's a lot of moving parts, both literally and figuratively, with these kinds of jobs. The literal moving parts is we're surrounded by construction machinery all day. Um, but there's a lot of like logistical moving parts. So my company, again, which is called Applied Earthworks, um, only handles paleontology monitoring and archaeology monitoring.
Okay.
And but there are many different things that you have to monitor for. So, for example,
I thought we weren't allowed to say archaeology on this podcast.
I didn't think so either, but here we are. I work with archaeologists every day, but um, you also need to monitor depending on where you are. We have some biology monitors who are helping, keeping an eye out for like any protected wildlife, making sure basically anything that's like alive, plants, animals, whatever. They're making sure that we don't disrupt the ecology too much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, we have the biomonitors, the archaeomonitors, which are mostly looking for like prehistoric artifacts, things like pottery, things like arrowheads, things like that. We have us, paleontology monitors, looking for fossils. And then we also have some tribal monitors who are keeping an eye out for like sort of more local, relatively more recent, um, artifacts and things from the local Native American tribes, which is really cool. So that we have at least 3 different companies monitoring the same area for 4 different types of things to help preserve them, which is really
I'm
neat.
just I'm just imagining like the coordination between all of the
It's
people there
ridiculous.
and the companies. Like
Hmm.
who do you report to? Do you have one person that you report to? Is it depending on, the situation, you have different people that you might go to. Like that's part of what crosses through my head with such a massive undertaking with so many different stakeholders.
Yeah, so it's each company has like their main person. So like we have a project manager, who I've not yet either told her about the podcast nor asked her to be on it, but I will because she actually um, studies or studied in grad school sloths, like ground sloths, which are some of my favorite groups of animals. Um, so I'd love to have her on the podcast and talk about it. But so she is the project manager for this particular project. Um, and so she's been with the company for quite a while, at least, probably 5 years anyway. Not super long, but so she is sort of our supervisor there. Within that, she is also sort of the supervisor for all the paleo people. And then we have a separate head archaeologist person also with our company who is not the project manager, but they coordinate with each other a lot and make sure that, each if we need any help for each other. For example, I went and helped out the archaeo people for a little while, to help speed up the construction because one of their sites that they were excavating was like in the way. So we needed to get that cleared up before the construction equipment could continue doing what they were doing.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, within that we have like our two people on site there. The construction people have, um, their main person. They have sort of like the head person. They have their head safety person who is a different person. They're not the same. Um, the biology people have their own supervisor who's on site every day. The tribal monitors have their own person, like head person, who I think has only been on site once. But just from talking to them, they're spread pretty thin right now.
I
They're
I
working
bet.
on a lot of different projects. Yeah. Um, so each, you know sector of these projects has their own person in charge who are pretty equal, honestly. Um, and in fact, because we are, and again, I want to say that I'm not like a government employee at all. I wish I had like the benefits and things of a government employee, but
Don't
um,
we all?
yeah. But you are a government employee. You work technically for the state.
Oh, I know. You don't have to tell me twice.
Yeah. So
It's awesome.
I know. um, but yeah, so we are sort of we enforce the laws essentially, without being like actual like law enforcement. But we've been told very clearly we could basically stop construction for, obviously we don't want to do it for any reason, but it's like I've stopped a couple pieces of equipment before just because I wanted to check out a rock to be like, is this a fossil? Is this not a fossil? Um, we are fully, in control of basically how quickly the construction goes, and the construction people know that, and they, respect that. They don't really rush us. They're like, you're here to do a job. We're here to do a job. Everything is going to be a lot easier if we're all, working together on it. Uh, and just from talking to like a couple friends who do construction-y things, uh, you know, obviously you have that sort of stereotype in your head about construction workers. They're the people who sit like on the like steel girders and catcall women. That has definitely not been my experience with these guys. These guys are super awesome and very
Well,
friendly.
that's very good news. That
Hmm.
it's
No,
they do
they're
not fill into the stereotype.
yeah, they're super friendly. Um, they're also always watching out for us. You know, like there was one time where I was supposed to be following a piece of equipment. I was behind it, but he just couldn't see me, and
Hmm.
he wouldn't move. And then I kind of realized, oh, he doesn't know where I am. So then I just kind of stepped like 2 feet to the left. He's like, oh, okay, there he is, and then he started going. So it's like they obviously don't want to hurt anybody, um, and so it's a really interesting sort of environment, and not like anything that I've kind of been on before.
Hmm. I mean,
Uh,
but like that, it's good news that the people around you are just like they're cool people.
oh yeah, like especially so uh, a lot of the I've talked to a lot of the other like monitors as well. I've talked to quite a lot of the like the bio people. They're super cool. One guy that I was talking to, he's like a former Marine that then like went and got a degree in bio. Now he walks his, they walk more than we do because they're not necessarily with the machinery all day. Um, so they're walking around just sort of within the project area so that like if they find something that is, like shouldn't be there or like they need to move, then they can move it off the project site area. So they walk probably closer to 10 miles a day.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, so this guy was in the Marines, then went and got a bio degree, and then walks 10 miles a day in the desert. What a life.
Wow. Just yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's been interesting, that's for sure. The weather after that first day was not nearly as bad. It's mostly been around 100, maybe a little less. Uh,
Is it a lot of the same thing every day? Like at least similar. I know it's not probably exactly the same, but is it a similar kind of structure to each day?
More or less. So I'll give you a brief sort of just outline of my days. So the first day, just because it was the first day, so we met in like the parking lot at 5 a.m. It's
Mm-hmm.
we had like a little
Little
meeting,
powwow.
yeah, little meeting right there before we left. We stop at a gas station because people who are experienced at this and actually know what they're doing brought coolers to keep in their vehicle to keep their water cold throughout the day. Because I drink probably close to 2 gallons a day of water, and that's less than like we're probably supposed to.
I 100% believe. I mean, I drink a lot of water just teaching all day in an air-conditioned school. You know,
So yeah,
exerting yourself like that, I believe
yeah.
it.
The I think the amount advised was 4 cups per hour, and so that is two regular water bottle, 16-ounce water bottle size. That is two of those per hour, and uh, we're there for from we get on site around 6 and we leave around 5. So that is
Wow,
18 water bottles a day.
that's
It's
a
supposed to be.
long. Yep,
Yeah, so
that's a long day.
we have been a little later because the construction guys kind of roll up. The construction starts at 7. Um, they roll up a little closer to 7 than we do, but just in case we needed to, work on some stuff that was like in their way, we usually get there a little earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yes, we leave most of the time after the first day, sometime around 5:30 or so. Get on site probably around 6 to 6:30. Um, construction starts at 7, and then I basically whatever area I'm sort of assigned to. Um, Generally, we try to have one paleo, one archeo, and one tribal monitor with each sort of crew doing a specific task. Um, So, for example, uh, most of the time I'm with the crew that's working on a road because there is a road sort of to the general area, but not one that leads exactly where we need to actually get all the equipment. So they need to build the road. So that's where I've
Right.
been. So we
Okay.
usually have two people out in front of the machine, looking for stuff so that they don't run it over, and then one person behind the machine looking through, the dirt that they dug up uh, to see if they like exposed anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And how often a day does something happen where all of a sudden you've got to stop and look at a fossil or specimen or something you think might be that? Like how often does that actually happen?
not that often. So they actually came out several times before the construction crews even got there, and like mapped out the boundaries of the project area. So all this project is on, uh, like I said, federal land, which the government is very particular about, and
Yeah.
so it's like if you I I think technically we're allowed to like walk outside of the project area, but no equipment, no vehicles for sure outside of the designated project area. And so they went and they sort of marked off where the extent of the area is, and then did a, like I said, they went out there several times, in the months before this project started. So it's not like they just came out for a weekend or something, but walked the entire
Hmm.
area and, looked for things beforehand, which were most of those sites that we had to clear up in order for the construction to keep going, was stuff that they had found, months ago and just sort of flagged. And we're like, we'll come back to that later when we have more hands on deck. And so,
Reasonable.
yeah. So generally, I think I've had to stop a couple pieces of equipment, but not for more than a couple minutes. Uh, Most of the time, it's just like following the machine and looking over rocks that are like in its tire tracks, or some of the machines just sort of scrape the surface and sort of dig, layers, and then sort of plow, basically like a snow plow, but for dirt, more or less. So I just look
Right.
through the like flattened area at rocks, but because I'm behind the machine, I can pretty much take as long as I want.
Yeah, I mean
So,
that's nice. If you're being behind the scene, you can take your time to figure out exactly
mhm.
what's useful and what criteria are you using. Like, how is it that you know that this is or isn't something that is worth digging deeper into?
um, more or less if it's a fossil or not.
Okay.
So again, I don't want to give too many particulars about where the area is, just because I don't really know what's kosher and what isn't yet.
Hmm.
Um, but if it's anything that's like bone or a couple other different kinds of fossils that we've been told to keep an eye out for here, um, then I'll usually, we leave it in place. And then I text my supervisor, be like, hey, come look at this thing, and send her a picture. If it's something, then she handles it from there, and I keep going with the machine. So my job is literally just to
Hmm.
walk and look at the ground for fossils. That's pretty much it.
Okay. Ah. Well, and I guess the most important question out of all this, are you enjoying it? Because I know this was kind of a big decision on a lot of different levels, but are you having fun?
Yeah, I really enjoy the people that I'm working with. I think I'm there are certain parts about it that make me relatively anxious, mostly like scheduling wise. So it's not anything about the job itself. Um, just it's like, so this project in particular, I think, was pretty wacky from everything. Like the lead up to it was pretty wacky from what my
Hmm.
supervisor has said. Um,
Yeah.
so she's like, most projects will not be this sort of haphazard at the beginning.
How long has
Be,
this been going on for? Like, how long will you be working on this specific project then?
so to my knowledge, and that's kind of why this is kind of haphazard. So, um, like I said, I got here Tuesday night, and my first day of work was Wednesday.
Hmm.
Um, and then I worked from Wednesday until Sunday. And then I had Monday, Tuesday off. But I didn't know I was having Monday, Tuesday off until like Saturday night.
Oh, that kind of sucks.
Right. And it's like, well, it's not like I'm gonna go. It's approximately it's over 5 or 6 hours away from where I actually live. So it's like it doesn't make much sense for me to go home. So that's why I've just kind of been hanging out in the hotel. Um,
Right. Not the worst
and
idea.
right, and it's like a lot of the things that are relatively nearby, um, are also in the desert and hot places, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. Like in the future, for sure. Like there's a national park, a couple national monuments within an hour and a half, 2 hours drive from here. But it's like it's also in the desert, and I don't want to go. Like I love national parks, but it's like if I'm gonna go struggle out in the desert, I at least want like my girlfriend to be with me when I do that. That's kind of
Right.
something that we enjoy, doing together, is going to different national parks.
And that's why you
So
guys work well together.
yeah, uh, so I just kind of hung out, but I think, as far as I know, my last day here is Friday, this coming Friday, but I
Wow.
don't have like official confirmation on that yet.
I didn't realize it was going to end that soon.
Oh, the construction itself is going to be ongoing for like probably over a year.
Oh, but okay. I see now.
Then they'll start rotating people, and we'll need to have less of an all hands on deck because, like I said, this was an unusually big project. They said that normally there will not be, you know 15 people just from our company on site. uh, normally they'll be working on other things, but because this one was so big and so much needed to happen so quickly, there needed to be lots of different construction crews doing things. Every construction crew needs monitors with them. And then also they had to do the collection teams for collecting the things that they had found on the surveys before the construction started. So we needed like 4 or 5 different crews all operating at the same time. They're like, that is very unusual. That normally does not happen. So uh, after that, there should only be like 1 or 2 crews out here, and then they'll start rotating us in for a couple weeks at a time.
Okay, and so there's a good chance you'll be back at that site before too long.
Yeah, as far as I know.
Okay.
I hope that they'll start sort of kicking me up to some more sites more toward where I actually live. Uh,
If only.
yeah, it'd be nice to actually be able to like sleep in my own bed. But the pay is quite nice. And I actually discovered something. I don't know if this is a California law or if this is a national law that no company that I've ever heard of actually does. So this is a real big shout out for my company. Um, so I had always heard that you get overtime if you work 40 hours within a week, right?
That was my understanding.
So I don't know
Unless
this.
if you're on an hourly wage.
Yes,
Right, unless if you're on salary, I didn't think that applied, but yeah.
right. So I don't know. This isn't like a California broad thing because my girlfriend's job doesn't have this rule. Hers is the normal. If you work over 40 in a week, you get overtime. This one,
Hmm.
if you work more than 8 hours in a day, the remainder is overtime,
Oh,
which is real nice.
I was gonna say that's.
It's pretty nice.
I was expecting you to give me some sort of no, actually, there's just no overtime at all. But it's actually the reverse. You're getting overtime basically every day because you're working long days.
More or less, yeah. Um,
Wow, Gavin,
so
my man.
yeah,
Yes.
so I'm very excited about that, obviously. So everybody from this company that I've interacted with has been like super awesome. So if you happen to live in Southern or Central California and you work in paleontology or archaeology, I can't recommend this company enough so far. Granted, I've only been doing this for a week, uh, so and I haven't been paid yet. So maybe I'll
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
a
Stay tuned
follow
for
up
episode
review.
43.
Maybe I'll have a follow up review about that. But yeah, I really enjoy it so far. Hopefully, it'll be in a little less harsh of an environment and a little closer to home next time.
Hmm. I mean,
Um,
that would be certainly nice for you. But as a first gig with this new company, it sounds like it's going pretty well, and I'm quite thrilled for you.
yeah, me too. I'm very excited. Uh, and it's really nice. They pay for the hotel. Apparently, that varies from project to project, though. Sometimes you'll have to pay for it and they'll reimburse you. But this one, the client. So how all of this sort of works. Actually, I'll finish that thought first. But so yeah, the client pays for the hotel, and then they give us an X amount of money per day for food, regardless of if you spend uh, that amount or not. You get it. So say the client, you know, uh, says you have $50 a day for food. If you spend 40, they give you the 50 anyway. You just have to you have to submit receipts and everything, but they'll still give you the
Right.
50, which is also
Okay.
nice. Uh, but
Yeah.
that apparently that varies from project to project. Uh, but so the way all of this sort of works. So say how does all of this even get started, right? So say Mike and I own a company where we want to put in some solar panels on federal land. Depending on whose land that is, or who has jurisdiction over that land, whether it's the Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, National Park Service would not even really entertain that kind of thing. But
Hmm.
um, depending on who actually has jurisdiction, you would basically reach out to. I'm assuming if you had one of these companies, you would know specifically who to reach out to get the permits and things. But you would first basically pitch your uh, project to them. Be like, hey, this is what I want to do. This is the scope of it. This is how big it's going to be. This is how long, the construction is going to last. may I do this, please? And so they don't buy the land from the federal government. They basically just lease surface use rights, essentially.
Okay, they lease surface use, and like you said, there's a bunch of permits and like a bunch of bureaucracy, red tape you need to go through for that. They're not just letting anybody on that land to do, to have some projects.
Right. And so once that gets approved, or I'm assuming concurrently as it's getting approved, we would reach out to obviously construction companies who are going to be doing all the work of building the thing. And then also, again, federal land, you would need to first figure out, okay, what kind of rock do we have here? Is it something that could hold fossils, specifically vertebrate fossils? Um, and then also you would look into like the archaeology of the area. Is this an area? I think regardless, you pretty much need the archaeology people. And then I honestly don't know nearly as much as I would like to about how like the tribal monitoring works. So I don't know what tribes would have jurisdiction over whether it would be like where the tribe currently is or whether their ancestral lands, are. I don't know how that is all worked out, but that would be something really interesting to learn more about.
Mm-hmm.
And so you basically, figure out, okay, what monitoring companies do we want to pay, essentially. So we'd reach out to there's a whole bunch of them. There's many different ones, and so we would contact, say, Applied Earthworks, basically see, is this something that you're available to do? Almost certainly they would say yes, because worst case scenario, they can just hire some more people.
Right.
Um, and then, like I said, they send out field teams, well before construction ever starts. And then day of construction, we actually didn't. So that first day, even though we got to the site at like around 6, we didn't actually start work probably until close to noon, because we were waiting on
Really?
because there are many different kinds of permits that you need from the federal government. The one that
Right.
we were particularly waiting on, so we had access to like be there, but they did not have the field use authorization yet. And the people at whatever office was for whatever reason taking their sweet time and reviewing it. And they, when we had our little meeting in the parking lot at 5 a.m. before we left, the project manager was like, yeah, we should be, I'm expecting it in my email any minute here. So it might be a little bit once we get to the site, but everybody stay on your toes and we'll be ready soon. 6 hours later. Well, and I think we actually got the permit sometime around 11, but they need to have it in print instead of just like on your phone. And there apparently nobody had a printer on the site, so they had to run back to the town.
Oh.
Yeah, they had to run back to town, which
Oh.
is like
Is
a
that the
half
only one
hour drive.
Kinko's or something? Good.
No, we're in the desert, man. So I don't know if they ran back to whatever hotel they're staying at or something.
No, I understand the complexities. It's just one of those things where it's like,
Yep.
man, it's we are being held up by like one single choke point
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
should be simple, but yet given the constraints like you mentioned, you're in the middle of the freaking desert.
Mhm.
That that makes it more difficult.
Yeah, and then it was really weird. So, of my, let's see, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So of my 5 days, we've been held up by rain at some point for 2 of them. And the entire
Wow.
time
So
I was
40 in the desert.
right, I was like, what is happening here? So the first day
This is
we
not
were
what
held
was
up.
promised.
Well, it was mostly for thunder and lightning than it was for rain.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the first day, the first day we didn't really start until like noon. The second day we got held up for 4 hours because of thunder and lightning. And then the second day we got held up for thunder and lightning, probably only for about an hour though. But yeah, it definitely rained more the second day. There just wasn't as much thunder and lightning. But yeah, it everybody was like, did anybody else feel like the end of Holes when it starts raining in the lake?
Yeah.
Like 4 different people were like, that's how it felt.
I think we've mentioned Holes before on the podcast. It is one of my
It's an
favorite
excellent
movies.
movie. It's a great movie. Uh, but yeah, so far I really enjoy it. We'll see though, longer term how it's gonna be.
Yeah,
But I'm
right. I mean, I
enjoying it.
know you've mentioned before, like, this, you're not expecting to die working this job. There is, you are working this job now and it's going well, and hopefully this job opens up some other opportunities. And the
Yeah,
fact that it's going well so far, and it's not like you feel like a sellout or you feel like you made a bad decision. It's still early on, but the fact that it's going well is just absolutely thrilling. And it's great to be able to hear, for me and I assume for the listeners, what this job is like in practice and some of the hoops you need to jump through. For anybody that's thinking about pursuing a career in this field, these are the things that might need to happen.
yeah, for sure. And I would say, granted, this is very harsh environments. I'm walking around in over 100 degrees on sand every day. Um, but I would say, in the terms of like the grand scheme of things, if you're a paleontologist who's like early in your career and you want to make a decent amount of money, this is a relatively easy way to do it. Obviously, there are a lot of complexities, a lot of moving parts, and you need to always, it's not like an easy job, you know.
Right.
Um, but it is much easier to probably get one of these jobs than it is to like find a job in academia for sure. So I'd say like 9 out of 10 would recommend. Wish it was a little cooler.
And hopefully when you get somewhere that's a little bit closer to your house. I mean, I imagine if there was a location closer to a house you'd be working at, it would be somewhat cooler, right? I mean, you're not living in the middle of the desert.
A little bit cooler.
Okay.
It would really depend on the area. It'd probably still hover around 100,
Oh,
but
hover around 100.
well, it's way less humid though. So it once after the first 2 days or so, like the third and fourth day, I was mostly fine. Um, Granted, the only pieces of skin that are like exposed at any point are like the tips of my fingers because I wear fingerless gloves.
Hmm.
Um, but other than that, it's like I'm wearing eye protection. I'd say the only downside that I've come across so far is that we wear masks all the time, whether we are indoors or outdoors. If we're around other people, we need to be wearing masks. And it's like, I get it. I understand and I appreciate them taking safety very seriously. But it's 110 degrees and wearing a mask
Is
sucks.
there a vaccination requirement for you guys?
um, I don't believe so. I don't know that for sure, though. Actually, so I know. So if you're a federal contractor, yes, obviously that's a relatively recent thing that the Biden
Yes.
administration has done. I don't know how that applies to us because we are contracted by somebody who is contracting the federal government.
Okay, so it's sort of like a tertiary uh
Right. So I don't
connection.
know if
Hmm.
that actually applies to us. I'm inclined to say it doesn't. Um,
It kind of seems like one of those problems that could be solved by just having everyone get vaccinated, and then the need for masks seems to be a little bit lessened there.
yeah, and it's like I mean we're all scientists, so I'm fairly sure all of us are vaccinated anyway. But yeah,
You would hope.
yeah, yeah. So far that's been the only sort of I guess, but
Right.
and
And
it's for a reason that I understand.
right, it is, it's not like it's completely idiotic. You get it, it's frustrating, but it is what it is. It's the price of doing business.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much all I've got to say about the job. I'm sure I'll have some updates next episode as well. But before we get too long in the episode, let's sort of transition to learning about some laws. So
Yeah.
if you don't like legalese, um, you can tune out here. Thank you for listening. Uh,
This has been episode 42 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, and that is Gavin. Gavin, continue with the next part of the episode.
Absolutely. So this is something again. I knew almost none of this next part until probably only a couple months ago. This is a class that I took in my last semester of grad school. So there is broadly only a single piece of federal legislation about fossils.
There's one federal law about fossils.
Yes.
Okay.
and
Go on.
that is the Paleontological Resources Preservation Act of 2009. And it's not even like it was its own law. It was part of the Omnibus Public Land Management Act of 2009. And correct me if I'm wrong, an omnibus bill is just sort of the grab bag where it's like there's one big thing that needs to get done and everybody else tacks on some of their other pet projects to it.
That is, it has been a while since I've refreshed myself on omnibus, but that is my broad understanding is that there's a lot of stuff in there.
Right. It's like there's one big thing that like needs to get done and everybody knows that like that one thing needs to happen. So it's like they attach all these other things that like they and maybe two other Congress people care about, but would definitely
Right.
not get like an actual floor vote. So they attack that on, and because people kind of can't say no to the big one,
Yep.
it gets passed. Um, so yeah, so this is like I said, the Paleontological Resources Preservation Act, or much more commonly referred to as PERPA. I'm going to be throwing lots of acronyms around here for different laws. So
Awesome.
PERPA is the only, you know, federal piece of legislation, not just like different policies and regulations within different agencies, but the only thing passed by Congress that is specifically about fossils. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Mostly because they had tried to do it a couple times and kept screwing it up. So
So is
we've
this one of
talked.
the things where it's better that it's the government's, deregulating and not having having less of a hand in it, you think?
No, it's that they kept not wording the laws that they did pass correctly or as they actually intended, and people finding loopholes. So then they were like, "Fine, we'll pass one."
Okay.
So, in our national parks episode, we talked a bit about the Antiquities Act of 1906. So that
I just
is,
finished watching. Have you ever seen the West Wing?
yes, I have.
I'm rewatching
Mm-hmm.
the West Wing very slowly, but in one of the season one episodes, the Antiquities Act comes up to
It
get
sure does.
around for the president. That is, I just remembered that.
Yeah, so the Antiquities Act, for anybody that doesn't watch The West Wing, uh, basically it was passed in 1906, and it broadly gives Congress the power to designate national parks, and the I don't know if it says specifically the president or the executive branch in general. Um, the
Which is
ability
run
to
by the president.
right, but I don't know if like the Secretary of Interior could do it themselves. I don't
Hmm.
think so. So I think it is just the president, but um, like under consultation from the Secretary of Interior, probably. But yeah, so the power to designate national monuments. So that's the main difference between parks and monuments. One is from Congress, one is from the president. So, but that broadly protects uh, different historical things. And I believe that this was sort of intended to mean fossils as well, but nowhere in it does it say anything about fossils. Its main focus was about cultural and archaeological things. But
Hmm.
if you'll remember in our episode about the Bone Wars were 15 to 20 years before this. And right around the early 1900s is when a lot of, the big dinosaurs were being mounted in museums. So like dinosaur mania was still very much front and center when this act was passed. Um, so it was really interesting that they meant to do it, but didn't, word it correctly.
That didn't word it. I mean that's one of those things where on one hand I'm like that's ridiculous, and on the other hand, like writing laws is hard, especially for a
It
bunch of people that
is
probably don't actually know what they're talking about.
right. And so then there are several other tried and failed attempts at trying to do it, where, again, mostly laws focused on archaeology, anthropology type things. But it was also sort of like implied that like fossils were included, but then people kept suing, and like they would take a fossil or something from federally managed lands and get arrested or whatever, and then they'd be like, it doesn't say fossils, so I'm fine.
Mhm.
uh
And technically, yeah.
Right. So there was the Antiquities Act in 1906. After that, I think it kind of went under the radar for a little while until the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, from 1970, or I guess 1969. Nice. Um,
Nice.
and so, again, just a broad environmental protection law,
Right.
mostly meant for environmental things, sort of implies protecting natural landscapes, which fossils are part of, but because it doesn't explicitly say fossils, people kind of got away with it.
Mm-hmm.
There was
Of
the
course.
Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, mostly called FLIPMA. A lot of acronyms today. Again, does not specifically say fossils. Although, funnily enough, this one, so in 1976, this is what repealed the Homestead Acts.
Really?
So it's like you could homestead up until like 1975, which I did not know.
I didn't realize it was that recent.
Yeah. I think that some of them had been repealed, but I think if you like really fought it and like went and like homesteaded on some federal land, and had enough money for like a decent lawyer, you could probably get away with it in
I
like
mean,
in like 1975.
that's, I mean, enough money for a decent lawyer is probably an important piece of that, but wow.
Right. Yeah. So again, Federal Land Policy and Management Act. So
Hmm.
they meant to be, have policies about different things with federal lands. Didn't include fossils. Up until, and that's mainly the most recent one, up until we get the one from 2009. So 30 years, there's not really significant legislation until one guy, let me actually pull up who, because there was one particular person. He was uh, a representative from Massachusetts, which surprised me because there's not like really significant fossils from Massachusetts that I'm aware of.
I mean, we talked about how the East Coast isn't exactly a
Hmm.
haven.
Yeah, so Representative James McGovern of Massachusetts introduced this act on October 1st, 2001. So he tried. um, Different people, and I actually found a really good thing sort of summarizing all sorts of federal land management uh, policies and laws about fossils uh, on an article on the Georgetown Law Review. The
Hmm.
article itself was mostly revolving around when the Trump administration shrunk two uh, national monuments in, I think, 2017, I think is when that was. But this was basically like, hey, here's why this is bad from a legal perspective. Because I believe that the reason that the administration gave for it was that the areas that it was excluding were protected well enough by other federal laws that they didn't need to be part of the national park system.
Hmm.
And whoever wrote this article in the Georgetown Law Review was basically like, here's why that legally is not correct. Um,
I mean, was there what was the basis of it not being correct?
Mostly that PERPA, the one that we've been talking about from 2009,
Yep.
only applies to vertebrates.
What?
Let me that is why I'm pretty much only looking for vertebrate fossils. Where I am, there's lots of chunks of like petrified wood, which is really neat. But my supervisor was like, we don't really care about that. That's not really within our purview.
Once
Um,
again, it sounds like holes.
right. So this is the actual um, this is how PERPA is written. This is the actual PDF of the law itself. So what it defines as paleontological resource. So the term, quote, paleontological resource, unquote, means any fossilized remains, traces, or imprints of organisms preserved in or on the Earth's crust that are of paleontological interest and that provide information about the history of life on Earth, except that the term does not include any materials associated with archaeological resource. Basically, say you find a fossilized bison with some like cut marks on it from like, different, Native Americans like way back in the day.
Hmm.
butchering it, that is no longer paleontological stuff. That is archaeological stuff, even though it is an animal and a
That's very
fossil animal.
interesting.
That is not under this law. Or any cultural item uh, as defined by Section 2 of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So, under that term, it basically says any fossilized remains that are of paleontological interest. However, further up in uh, another definition of casual collecting, it says the term, quote, casual collecting, unquote, means the collecting of a reasonable amount of common invertebrate and plant paleontological resources for non commercial use, either by surface collection or the use of non powered hand tools, resulting in only negligible disturbance to the Earth's surface and other resources. As used in this paragraph, the terms, quote, reasonable amount, unquote, quote, common invertebrate and plant paleontological resources, unquote, and, quote, negligible disturbance shall be determined by the secretary.
Hmm.
So basically, depending on who the
That's
secretary is,
this is
those
Secretary of the
definitions
Interior.
are, yes.
Okay.
Um, Depending on who the secretary of interior is, what those mean can vary a lot. So I believe the current thing for a reasonable amount is you can take I believe 100 pounds of material a year or 25 pounds per day. Um,
100. I mean, how much is that? Like, is that
Depending
a
on
lot?
what the material is, if it's petrified wood, that's not all that much.
Okay.
If it's, you know, clamshells, things like that, that's a lot. Uh,
Okay.
co- Common invertebrate and plant paleontological resources. What does common mean? You know,
What? Well, yeah. There's a lot of words like that in the law, like
which
common,
that's
reasonable
how laws
person, things
work
like
in
that.
general
Yes.
because they want to give themselves leeway to have some kind of
Absolutely.
um, discretion. But just because a particular fossil is common in New York does not mean that it's common in California.
That's
It-
another good point. Common where?
right, and granted they have lots of these things worked out, but if you are a casual collector, say you wanted to go to, because I knew several people who would go into um, or I guess actually by secretary in this case they mean whichever secretary has jurisdiction, because national forests are actually under Department of Agriculture instead of Department of
Oh,
Interior. Yeah,
I did not know that.
yep. So there was a big national forest nearby where I lived in South Dakota, and I knew quite a lot of people who would go out and collect fossils and things because even though it's federal land, you could do that.
Hmm.
Uh, but you know there was even sort of there's a fun story that's actually I don't know why I called it fun because it's actually very sad. There was a national monument in South Dakota called Fossil Cycad National Monument that ended up getting decommissioned
By
because
who?
like the Department of Interior.
Like when did it happen
Oh
though?
oh a while ago. I don't know exactly what the dates on it were, but it was not around
Okay.
for very long. But it got decommissioned because there weren't sufficient laws protecting these fossils, and you know, they were all taken. Pretty much. Like you could find one or two there if you really looked and knew what you were looking for. You can just go to that spot and you can see where they all were.
But they're all gone now
But
because people
they're all
just
gone.
wow.
So if you were to find, and one of the arguments that that article in the Georgetown Law Review said is that like part of the, I don't remember which of the two monuments. I think it was Grand Staircase Escalante. Um, they part of it that was removed from the monument had was part of a petrified forest where it's like you could find petrified logs like 30 feet long, which is incredible. But under these laws that doesn't really count, and as long as you only took 25 pounds of it, you could come back. Say I went out with some kind of equipment to cut it so I only took 25 pounds, I could come back the next day, take 25 more pounds and do that 4 times to get to my 100 pounds a year. Then just give the tools to you. You could go do it. And while it says for non-commercial personal use, if you were to sell it, who would know really,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Not that
So
we're advocating crimes, but
no, absolutely not. But it's like
but
that kind of thing happens a lot, and it's a really big problem.
so is there an effective way that anyone's proposed to actually fix that problem?
So to be fair, order by the Trump administration is still being kind of argued in the courts. To my
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, the Biden administration could just be like, "Hey, we're gonna re-expand those two monuments back to what they were beforehand," and I think that'd be completely fine
That would take care of most of our issues there.
for that particular
Right, for
for
that
those
just one.
particular monuments. Yeah,
Is this a
um,
problem broader than just these two particular monuments, though? Like, is it
like fossil theft, absolutely.
okay? And is
Um,
there anything that can be done, either just by the executive branch or by Congress itself to help fix that, or is this a problem that's just
I
hard to police?
I really think Congress would have to appropriate more funds to the Bureau of Land Management for more people to just be driving around watching for fossil theft.
Mm-hmm.
Um, either Bureau of Land Management or Forest Service or whichever agency has jurisdiction, but to all of them essentially. But the Bureau of Land Management is by far the largest um, federal agency in terms of like how much land it has under its jurisdiction. But if you're like me, I had never heard of the Bureau of Land Management until I moved to South Dakota.
Yes, whenever you hear BLM, you think it's something else.
Yes. Uh, so yeah, that is so even the single piece of actual paleontological legislation that we have uh, only covers vertebrates, which again, even as a vertebrate paleontologist, I don't like. So
It should be, there should just be more. It seems like an area that, for all the laws we have on the books, there's room for more
right,
and some better ones.
mhm. And it's like, to be fair, also, um, most museum and other collections places do not have space for all of these invertebrate things.
That's still wild to me. That is just nuts.
Yeah, so like in when I lived in South Dakota, our museum, we still had a backlog from like 30 years ago because those people had the mindset of we're going to collect every single thing that we see and bring it
Mm-hmm.
back to the lab
Right.
without really considering logistically we don't have space for this.
Mm-hmm.
Our building is only so big. So a lot of it is just sitting unprepared because we don't have the space to do anything with it. And that's not at all an uncommon problem.
It's that still is just truly nuts to me that like space is the issue. It's almost like how when you read about computers from the 1980s and like the reason why Y2K was a thing going back even further was because there wasn't enough computer space, and then that problem got solved, and now we have more computer space than we know what to do with. And it's just wild to me that the physical space needed to house all of the specimens is a real choke point for the industry.
And like there's also like a time sort of component where it's like, okay, if say you bring a whole bunch of stuff back and you did have space for it, you need somebody to prepare it, get it ready for study, get all of the rock off of it, and properly document, all of the, what the orientation of it was. Ideally you should be doing that in the field, but when you're preparing specimens like in the lab, you do all that kind of stuff too. And so that it takes a huge amount of time. Like for every like I think I saw for like every hour of time it takes to like extract a specimen from the field, particularly a big specimen,
Hmm.
it takes like over 20 hours in the lab to like fix to get it ready for like study.
Really? And
It
then you
takes
better actually
so
study it.
long. Yeah.
Wow.
So like I took a class. Granted, it was in the first semester of COVID, so I didn't. It got disrupted quite a lot, but
Did you maybe
uh,
not learn as much as you otherwise would have?
perhaps you could say that. Uh, but yeah, it was. I took a class in vertebrate fossil preparation, and it takes forever to do it correctly. Uh, so fossil preparators are not paid nearly enough for the work that they do, or given enough credit for the work that they do. But anyway, we're now kind of rambling. Uh,
That's all right.
but
We've already
yeah,
told anybody that doesn't want to listen to this kind of thing that they should already tune out.
that's fair. And so one thing that I actually am sort of just looking at here, also in this purple law, they have a section called civil penalties, which essentially, if you violate this, what happens?
Yeah, so you're not going to jail. You'll be paying a fine.
Let's see. Let's see. A person who violates any prohibition contained in an applicable regulation. I hate reading legal documents like this. They don't make any sense. Let's see. Amount of penalty. The amount of such penalty assessed under paragraph 1 shall be determined under regulations promulgated. Like, what does that even mean?
So that means put out by the executive branch agency.
Oh,
So
okay.
basically, Congress has deferred. This gets into a whole legal doctrine called Chevron deference, and then our deference.
hmm
There's a whole bunch of fun stuff to have. It sounds like the penalties will be determined by the executive branch agency, and Congress has left it up to them to determine the
Gotcha.
penalties. That's what it sounds like it's saying, just based on that.
It says it takes into account the following factors: the scientific or fair market value, whichever is greater, of the paleontological resource involved as determined by the secretary, which is very dumb because if you found a new species, something that was determined to be a new species, the fair market value of that might be really low. Scientific value of that is obviously incredibly high, which is a good thing. So they would be punished under like the scientific one, but it's like I
So
don't even know
how do
why
you
they
determine that?
include right. And it's like the fair market value. So it's like you're treating fossils as commodities instead of as a scientific resource, which is not cool. Um, let's see. The cost of response, restoration, or repair of the resource and the paleontological site involved. That's a good one. Any other factors considered relevant by the secretary assessing the penalty. So, yeah, you're not going to jail. You might pay quite a bit of money,
Hmm.
um, but
Yeah, that's
interesting.
civil penalties for you. You're not going to go to
Yeah.
jail. Just still a bad idea, though. Again, we're not advocating breaking laws on this podcast.
No, if you steal fossils, you are a
Especially,
horrible person.
yeah, like there are some laws, whatever, but don't steal fossils. That goes against everything that we stand for.
Exactly, it does. I highly encourage. We'll put a link to that Georgetown Law Review article um, in down in the show notes if you want to check it out. It's a really interesting read, uh, just because a lot of the stuff is relatively abstract if you're just reading like the legal text because a lot of it doesn't make sense to somebody who's not used to it. But this person like puts it in the context of like a case study essentially of these two monuments and why they don't have as much jurisdiction or offer as much protection as some people might think they do. Uh, whereas when they were in the national park system, it is a significantly higher degree of protection uh, because regardless of what it is, whether it's an invertebrate, a plant, or just a rock, National Park Service does not screw around. They take that extremely seriously, and you could potentially go to jail. So, yeah, I think that's all I've got for this episode.
Is that all we've got for the legal aspect? Is that it for the podcast?
I think so.
Well, this has been a really fun kind of trip to just learn what's going on in your life for the new gig and everything, and then just kind of like how your job works and the laws that govern it and the lack of laws that seem to be governing it at the moment. Uh,
Call your congressperson and
yes,
be
call
like,
your member of
hey,
Congress.
we need better laws about fossils.
And they will tell you you're the only person that's called about this.
Yes,
But
they
still,
will.
that is all the more reason why you should call and bring this up.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, this has been episode 42 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, and that is the newly re-employed Gavin on the other side of the continent. This has been episode 42, and we hope to see you guys next Wednesday. Take care, everybody.
Bye.